First is Susan Fife-Ferris. Susan currently serves as the Director of Solid Waste Planning and Program Management for Seattle Public Utilities, where she oversees all aspects of the City of Seattle's solid waste planning and program development, including the management of over $100 million in annual service contracts and approximately $20 million in annual capital improvements. Previously, Susan served as manager of the City of Bellevue, Washington, Environmental Conservation and Outreach Programs, where she oversaw all aspects of environmental programs and communications for the city's utilities department. Prior to entering public service, Susan worked as an environmental consultant and a lawyer, specializing in municipal finance and general municipal law. During this time, she was on the forefront of research that showed the economic reasons for why recycling made sense. Susan received her bachelor's degree in applied mathematics from the University of California, Berkeley, and has a law degree from the University of Southern California. Phil Bresee joined Arlington County, Virginia in 2016 as the Environmental Management Division Chief in the County Solid Waste Bureau. Here he manages Arlington's collections and processing contracts, public outreach and education programs, and solid waste planning efforts. Prior to joining Arlington, Phil was the City of Philadelphia's recycling director, helping to lead programs and planning for the nation's fifth largest city. From 2004 to 2012, Phil was the recycling program manager for Broward County, Florida, where he directed programs and initiatives on behalf of the county's 26 partner cities and the Broward County Public School System. Phil has served in leadership positions in statewide recycling associations, including as chair of Recycle Florida Today and as president of the Maryland Recyclers Coalition. He is a Maryland native, where he got his start in the solid waste field, working for Frederick and then Howard counties. Phil holds a BS in political science and did graduate work in business and public administration. And finally, Jim McKay. Jim is the general manager of the City of Toronto's Solid Waste Management Services Division. In this capacity, he is responsible for all the solid waste management programs and services for Canada's largest city and the fourth largest municipal waste management system in North America. Jim is a recent addition to the city, coming down from the consulting industry, where he has a long history of working with municipalities across Canada and the United States on some of North America's largest and most innovative solid waste projects and programs. And with that, we're going to start with Susan.
Good afternoon. I think it is afternoon now. Okay, there. Great. Oops. So today I'm going to be talking about how to piece everything together. I'll be talking a little bit about some of the programs that we do, but I'm not going to be doing a deep dive. I'm basically looking at how we plan and decide what we want to do. Again, I'm from Seattle Public Utility. How many out there know where Seattle is? How many have ever been there? Ever gone up in the Space Needle? Well, you're going to see the Space Needle a few times. So we look at a lot of different pieces to put it all together, and this is basically the outline of what I'm going to be covering. The basics of Seattle, the diversion goals, important factors that we take into consideration. Then I'm going to highlight the multifamily organics program that we have, and construction and demolition, and then cover some of the lessons learned. So basic terminology, municipal solid waste, where I come from. Under that category, we have diversion. That includes recycling, composting, and then reuse. We just opened a brand new North Transfer Station. At that location, we actually have a recycling facility that has a reuse facility. So, and then also organics. So for us, organics is yard waste, and then food contaminated paper. And so some people will call it food soiled paper, but we call it food contaminated paper. We also have disposal. We have the landfill and alternative daily cover, and then beneficial use. This is in the construction and demolition. Some people call it CDL. We call it C&D. You'll see me call it both, but mostly it's construction and demolition that I'll be talking about. And you have the use of the clean wood for fuel, and then also the diversion just for the C&D. So where do we get our data from? We get our data from a lot of different locations. We get our data from actual contractors. We have a variety of contracts that cover collection, processing, and disposal. And then we have an assortment of contracts with consultants that help us with outreach and education and a variety of other studies. We also have private MRFs, material recovery facilities within our jurisdiction. We have private recyclers that primarily work with our commercial customers. We have private composters, we have private transfer stations, and then the City of Seattle actually operates 2 transfer stations. We have, also we do a ton of research and studies, and I'll go more into that, but that includes our planning, waste composition studies, surveys, and then focus groups with stakeholders. So a little bit of background on who Seattle is. We have approximately just under 700,000 people in our city, and we're growing. We have lots of what I call birds of prey. Those are the cranes that you see in the background here. We have a lot of those right now. We're really booming. We have a large population or employment population, over 500,000 people who work actually in the city. One of the things that we struggle with, and I'm sure people across the area, across the nation struggle with, is we have a lot of people who live in Seattle and they go to work out in the suburbs, like Microsoft and other companies. And then we have a lot of people who live in the suburbs who come into Seattle. And not all of those recycling programs and diversion programs are identical. So we run into issues at both the employee level and the residential level of trying to get consistency across the region. Counts, we have about, a little over 150,000 residential can and cart counts. We have curbside collection, and then about 4,000 residential dumpsters. Those are multifamily, and mostly multifamily or all multifamily, and then 6,000 commercial dumpsters. We do have some programs. I was listening to the New York City presentation yesterday about their organics. We do have some programs in our central core where we've gone to bags only that are collected on a daily basis or every other day basis in order to get rid of the cans. We tried to get rid of dumpsters out of alleyways and stuff. That's for safety and other reasons, space reasons. But mostly our commercial customers are dumpsters and then some carts and stuff. Type of service, we do garbage, recycling, and organics collection at the curb. And we have recyclables and organics are banned from our garbage. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we are an enterprise fund. So we basically have to balance budget every year and we can't spend more. So we don't touch the general fund at all. Our garbage all gets long hauled to Oregon. So there are a number of large regional landfills in our area. And Seattle, I oversee the management of some historical landfills. We have a number of really old landfills that have been closed for decades and decades. We still have to manage those, but the garbage that we generate, that we've been generating for the last 20, 30 years, has been long hauled down to Arlington, Oregon. And so we only pay for what we ship. So the less we ship, the less we have to pay. And so there's a huge economic benefit for not having to ship it. Just to give you just a rough idea of some of the data, I'm not going to go deep into it, but this gives you a rough idea of how our garbage has gone down, the actual garbage that we're landfilling, and then how our diversion rate has gone up over the last 15 years. So diversion rates by sector. This just gives you an idea of what our goals are for 2022. So our goals in the single family is 83% by 2022, down to South Hall, 46% by 2022. Our overarching goal is 70%. So we have some room for improvement because we're only currently about 58%. We're currently developing our data. But this just looking by sector, for us, tells us a story, and we like to learn the story. But again, our diversion rate is based on weight. It's not based on volume, and that tells you another story, too, if you start looking at volume. And I could give an entire presentation about the fact that we're running after a recycling rate based on weight, and maybe that's not the right thing to be doing, and that maybe we should be looking at other metrics, but that's not why I'm here today, so I'm not going to get into that too much. But I will touch on that, and that is something that Seattle is going to be seriously looking at in the near future. So what do we do planning-wise? We are mandated at the state level to do a solid waste management plan. Now, you can get together, and in the state, most jurisdictions do it with their county, and their county is the lead planning agency. Seattle went it alone in the late 80s, and they've been doing their own solid waste management plan since. Our last solid waste management plan was developed around 2011, but it was actually approved in 2013. So we're in the process of just starting up the next planning process. We also do, we gather data very regularly, and we're very transparent about the data. We put it on the website. Seattle is really in the forefront. So what's a smart city? So we're here to talk about smart cities. You're all smart cities, but here in this context, it means you gather data and then you use that data to make decisions and drive your policies and drive the decisions that you're going to, or the programs that you're going to do. So that's what we do, and we like to be transparent about everything, not just in solid waste, because there's a lot of smart people in the Pacific Northwest, and maybe there's somebody out there who can develop an app that we might be able to use, maybe the pothole app, or, you know, I'll talk a little bit at the end about, we have a Find It, Fix It app that we use. So there might be something out there that might be, you know, on the forefront of technology that we might be able to use, that somebody out in the public sector or the private sector might develop and then, you know, come to us with. So economic factors are really important. So we have a pay-as-you-throw system. That means the more you generate, the larger your garbage can, the more you're going to pay. Market value of commodities is really important. You know, we all know that the market value fluctuates, and, you know, sometimes things are up, sometimes things are down. Also, what's going into the mix has been changing a lot. Newspaper has gone way down, plastics has gone up, there's been lightweighting. So anyways, market value is really important. And then we model scenarios all the time for solid waste planning. This just gives you a rough idea, but I want to tell you real quickly, most people don't have 96-gallon containers of garbage in Seattle. Only 2% of our customers actually have a 96-gallon container. But this gives you a rough idea across the board of, say you had, instead of having a 96-gallon of garbage and you put 96 gallons in your food bin, you're only going to pay $12 a month for that. But if you don't and you put it in your garbage, which technically you're not supposed to, you're going to pay a lot more. But most people are at the 18 to 20 gallon container size, and then 32 and below is where the bulk of everybody is. But most people are what we call the mini can. So we have a micro can, we have a mini can, and then we have the 32 gallon, we have a 64, and then we also have the 96. So we have a variety of options for people to take advantage of, and then you have your organics, and your recycling is free, and it's picked up every other week. So operations. So again, we look at what the different operations, we're involved in some of that operations, and we contract out some of that operations. So we have the collection services at the curb, we have transfer stations, we have processors, and we have the enforcement. And enforcement is an element of it, and that's an oops tag over on the side. Education outreach, huge importance. Educate, educate, educate. You'll hear me say that a couple of times. We do it initially. We look at where it needs to be done, and then we have ongoing. And I brought a whole bunch of brochures that I'll just leave out here after or down on the table if anyone wants to pick them up. We have newsletters that go out. We have our where does it go brochure, and we do classify based on color, according to the cart color. And then customer feedback. We're surveying our customers all the time. We conduct focus groups. We want to know what they feel, and we learn from that, and then we change our programming and change our outreach and change how we do things based on that. And then we pilot. We believe in pilot, and then find out, and then change, and be adaptable, and be willing to make changes, and don't say, no, it has to be this way, because a lot of times your customers will give you fabulous feedback that you didn't even think about. So policies, yes, we have disposal bans. We've had disposal bans for a while. I'm not going to go into great detail, but we've used disposal bans to drive programs. And surprisingly, they're fairly popular. Metrics. So we believe in meaningful metrics. I will tell you, collect as much data as you can, and there's a difference between data collection and then performance measures and the metrics that you're using to drive programs. You can collect a ton of data, and then somebody way smarter than me can take that data and spin it, especially now, if you've gone to some of those some of these other sessions talking about what they can do with data. You can learn a lot by mining that data for information. But then you set your performance measures or your goals based on where do you want to go? What do you want to do? So they have to be meaningful. If you're just setting a goal just for the heck of setting a goal or reporting something just to report it, it's not purposeful. But if it's meaningful, if it's actually making you change what you do, if it's actually making you do something with your programs that might be different, it's driving decisions, it's informing policy, then it's really worth gathering. So piecing it together, I'm going to talk about multifamily organics and C&D recycling, just really high level. So this is our residential organics diversion. It shows a really pretty graph going up, and it looks like it's gone up since 2000 to 2015. But why is that? So this gives you a little bit of what's gone into place. And I'm focusing here on the multifamily. So you can see in 2007, the food waste collection was piloted, and then you saw some going up, and then you have the food waste collection required, and then food waste banned. So there's a difference between requiring food waste or organics, and what that means is you as a customer have to have garbage, recycling, and food waste or organics. It doesn't mean you have to put it in there. When you ban it, that means you have to put it in there. So that's the difference. So you can require that you have the service, but if your customers don't take advantage of the service, then you're not going to see the tick up necessarily. There's different ways, to get people to do it. You don't always have to make them, but if you have the bans, we found really helped push things up. So again, cheaper to recycle your organics, and you can use a smaller cart size. Now, I will admit that in multifamily and commercial, it's sometimes harder to downsize their dumpsters as opposed to a single-family resident. That is something you just have to be aware of. But if you can get a commercial or a multifamily to move their organics out of the waste stream and put it into an organics cart, the likelihood is that they'll be able to downsize and save money. Processing. So we process about 190,000 tons of organics a year. We have very limited competition. That's something that we would love to see more competition, and we really would like to see more processing capacity. We haven't really expanded too much in the anaerobic area. In the in-vessel, there's some of that, but it's not as common around where we are. Policies. So again, we banned food waste in 2015. I mentioned something about our customers. It's actually, we're pretty okay with it. We did a survey in 2005. 60% of residents supported having a ban of food waste in the garbage. By 2014, through outreach and education, we had done some piloting. 74% of residents supported that, and 13% of residents were neutral. So that's a pretty high, that's 90%, almost 90% of our residents were either neutral or supportive of banning it from the garbage. And what we've also found in our surveys is that residents want to be involved. They want to be in the decision-making process. And, Seattle is the city of involvement. And so we definitely encourage that, but they really do, and then it helps our programs be successful. And then we have enforcement. We have the drivers of our collection contractors will look. It's just basically plain view for contamination, and same in the multifamily and the commercial. Plain view, is there contamination? They'll put oops tags. A couple times we do have fines. Very, 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 very rare. I think maybe twice have we ever fined a single family, and it's very, 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 very rare to fine, but they're very minimal fines. So this is to give you an idea of how comparing apples to apples versus apples to oranges. So this is a multifamily, single family organics chart, and it shows multifamily being lower than single family. And it looks like, wow, multifamily is way lower than single family. Well, yeah, it is, but also multifamily doesn't have yard waste. And so when you're looking at organics specifically, putting a bar chart of multifamily next to single family isn't really telling much of a story unless you know what goes into it. And what's the difference? They have very different infrastructures. You know, single family, to put it out at the curb, very different in multifamily. And so we did a lot of digging into the multifamily infrastructure. Ownership, you own the cart. You're out there curbside, there's peer pressure in your neighborhood and stuff. Multifamily, you're going to the back alley or wherever, nobody's watching you put it in, nobody's paying attention. So that kind of aspect. And so those are just things to keep in mind, you know, when you're looking at data. Are you comparing apples to apples, or are you comparing apples to oranges? I'm going to start running through these pretty quickly so I can get to C and D. But we looked at co-location, not co-location. What this chart shows you is we looked at, was garbage, recycling, and food waste, were they co-located, or was the food waste container way far away? Or was the recycling and food waste way far away? And then we also looked at, was there access to food waste? Was there access on every floor? Or was there only one location where you could go to put your materials? And then we also looked and kind of graded how well people were doing. Were they actually getting the food from their kitchen to the cart in the proper place? Then we also looked at what kind of education. We did targeted, hold on, did I go? I think I'm, let me see something. Yeah, okay. So we did targeted education and outreach. We targeted the low food rated, so the ones that only rated, who had scored very low on the getting it from the kitchen to the container. We also looked at the small per unit waste capacity, those who weren't really recycling that much per unit, and we started targeting them. And we collected feedback from those residents, and we developed in language. So this is another thing that we've been really moving to. You'll hear a lot about translating. Well, we also transcreate our material. So the difference is when you translate material from English to another language, it doesn't always translate correctly, and you can get some really awkward or weird things when it's translated. So when you transcreate, you actually work with people who are from that culture or from that, and they actually help you translate it into a way that makes sense for that culture or that language that you're trying to reach. So that's something you may be hearing more about, is transcreation as opposed to translation. And so you'll see here as an example of an in English and then a translated piece. And then we provide a lot of tools. We provide in-kitchen containers. We provide bio bags, you know, to get people up and started. Lots of literature, again, that you can help yourself to some of. And so we do a lot of outreach and education. And then some of the lessons learned that most successful if economics, operations, education, and outreach and policies all work together. So you have to keep in mind that they all have to blend together, and then let your metrics tell you a story. They will tell you a story if you just look at them. And if you don't see the story, have somebody else look at them. And I always encourage more people at the table, the better, because different minds bring different things. And increasing co-location and access to food diversion is a key. And then there isn't one type of multifamily. And I'm sure anyone who's dealt with multifamily knows that, but there isn't one. We have high rises, we have mixed use buildings, we have the spread out old fashioned apartments, we have duplexes, we have high income, we have low income. So there isn't one type. So one type of outreach isn't going to fit all. One type of approach isn't going to fit all. So try to customize as much as you can and educate. So C&D, real fast. So it's managed completely separately. It has a lower tip fee to recycle, and they have taxes at the final destination for transfer that you can avoid if you recycle it. We work together with the county to certify facilities. We have 8 certified facilities, and we encourage source separation of recycling, a lot of self-haul, challenges, long travel times to the facilities that can actually take C&D, and expanded materials, trying to find markets for those. And then field location. This is an example of the Bullet Foundation building, and it is a beautiful, highly sustainable building, and it gives you an example of, we did outreach with, we have LEED, we have Built Green, we have plan review, we have reporting requirements, and we have salvage assessments. And this is a type of building that took advantage of all that we offered and did it really, really well. Policies, again, there's a landfill disposal ban. You can't put C&D in the local landfill, which King County, which we reside in, and you can't long haul it through our system. So you have to manage it through the C&D program, and it's cheaper if you recycle. There's flow control, so, and then there's waste diversion reporting requirements. Again, we get that information back, and there's recycling facility certification. We have permitting. You can get incentives through using Built Green and trying to do the right thing through the permitting. And then we require deconstruction and salvage assessments. And that's a very informative thing. And we have a 70% recycling goal for 2020 for C&D. Again, sources. Okay, I'm going to run real fast. Metrics. Again, this shows you kind of the metrics. Just tells a story. And then our challenges, just markets, finding markets, and again, educate. So what are our successes? That working with the county, and we need more enforcement at the back end. And then real quickly, lessons learned. Grow your program incrementally, engage your stakeholders, pilot, educate, stage rollouts, set achievable goals, budget and track progress, collect as much information as possible, and be patient. And then, again, incentives work and markets are critical. Educate. Equitable outreach is really important. Identify what your different customer audiences need and make sure you have equitable services. Operations, measure inequalities across access and convenience. Disposal bans work, but you need to have buy-in, and you need to grow them incrementally, and you need to engage your stakeholders. And track your metrics, and the more information, the more stakeholder engagement you can get is better. Okay, and that's it. And I just wanted to show that people, or all of you, that this is our new transfer station, and isn't it lovely? It's built in. That's the kind of the big thing. It's built in an area that those are residents right behind it, straight up, so it's borders a residential area. That's a port, not a port, but it's where fishing trawlers come out of, and it's fit right in, and anyone coming to Seattle who wants a tour, I'd be happy to give you a tour. It's flat floor, it's fabulous, very modern, and incorporates a recycling reuse facility, and we're very proud of it. With that, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. That was a jam-packed presentation. Phil?
Thank you, Bill, and thanks, Susan. And Jim, and thanks to WasteExpo for inviting me back. I think I was here a few years ago, probably on a panel with you. And for little Arlington, we're actually it's a point of pride for us to actually be on the stage with Toronto and Seattle, two heavy hitters and real pioneers in the recycling world. And you're okay too, Bill. So just to start off a little bit about Arlington County. So we are only 26 square miles. We're actually the smallest county in the United States by land area. We have a population of about 230,000 and about 104,000 households, which you'll hear a little bit more about. And there's almost as many people work in Arlington as live in Arlington, which is a challenge I know that Seattle has as well. Because of our proximity, we are home to a lot of federal agencies, including the Defense Department, Pentagon, DARPA, Transportation Security Administration, DEA. And Arlingtonians are well educated and very affluent as well. And so I think that the educational achievement rate and the per household and per capita incomes are, always among the highest in the country. So it's a good demographic for recycling programs, don't get me wrong, but it's also a demographic that has a lot of high expectations. And just a little more about the history. Arlington was actually part of the area that was surveyed for the District of Columbia, and it was that portion of D.C. was actually given back to the state in 1846, and we were actually known as Arlington City and County until 1920, and that's when Arlington came to be. We're a county, but we actually function as a city. We have no incorporated towns or cities in Arlington. And also home to just a lot of sites that a lot of Americans are familiar with, like Arlington National Cemetery and the Marine Corps War Memorial. So some of the services that we provide in my organization is a very comprehensive menu of services, includes carded collections for recycling, trash, and yard waste. We also have on-call collections for e-waste, for scrap metals, bulk appliances, and then also brush, and we do deliver mulch as well from that. My agency actually does that. So we contract out for pretty much the services on the left side, and a lot of the services on the right side of the slide there are services that actually Arlington County staff provides. We have a pretty solid multifamily and commercial recycling ordinance and requirements, and that's sort of where a lot of the energy has been invested in the last couple of years. So with that background, who we are and where we are, our current solid waste management plan was adopted in 2004, so it's a lot older than Susan's plan. And Virginia's Department of Environmental Quality, they do require us to have 20-year planning horizons and require us to update our plans every 5 years. But really, I think that the state is most concerned about ensuring that counties have disposal capacity. And the recycling goals, as you can see, the 25% for the larger jurisdictions and the 15% rate for smaller jurisdictions, if they're not the lowest in the country, they're right up there or right down there. So nevertheless, the 2004 plan, that is our current North Star, and it did lay out some pretty solid goals, including expanded multifamily and commercial recycling, single stream, semi-automated collections, and expanded organics collections. And these are all things that we have implemented. So as far as the overall trends in solid waste in Arlington, for 2016, and this is hot off the press, we reported a recycling rate of just under 47%. And the recycling / diversion rate has hovered in Arlington between 44 and 50% for the last few years. But I think the most important thing that we have realized is that we've seen a marked decrease in the amount of solid waste that we're actually generating in Arlington. So if we go back to 2004, when our current plan was adopted, we've seen our overall solid waste generation in Arlington go from about 280,000 tons per year to about 185,000 tons per year in 2016. So that's a decrease of more than 30%. And that comes on the heels of, or that comes, it's concurrent with Arlington's population actually increasing by about 16%. So looking at a per capita basis, the generation per capita has fallen from about 1.5 tons per person per year to about 0.89 tons. Our residential services are we think the backbone of our overall program. We do our residential waste stream is about 60,000 tons, and some of I think our biggest programmatic action and success in the last couple of years was the introduction of year-round yard trimmings collection in early 2016. Now, we had provided seasonal collections for a number of years that were very effective, probably to the tune of 500-600 pounds per household per year. But by introducing year-round collection, that has really helped raise it to another level. And so the average household is now putting in is now recycling about 200 pounds more yard trimmings per year than they were previously. And we have seen sort of a shifting. So some of the stuff that we used to pick up in our leaves collection program and in our seasonal brush collection program, some of that has now finding its way into the green carts, which is where we want it to go. And so, but overall, we've seen a net increase of about 3,500 tons in organics material. And indeed, when we do quarterly waste audits of our residential stream, and so the waste audits prior to 2016 consistently showed that yard trimmings were the biggest chunk in our biggest fraction in our residential solid waste stream. And that's even with the on-call brush collections and the seasonal leaf collection programs. So since post-implementation of year-round yard trimmings collections, that 27% or 28% yard trimmings fraction has now fallen to less than 6%. And of course, food waste has now stepped up to fill that space. Again, mentioned commercial, and it's just sort of the overall Arlington solid waste stream. I think like a lot of densely populated areas and cities, the commercial sector is the majority of our waste stream. I think in Arlington it's probably a little bit higher than most jurisdictions. So about 2/3 is generated by the private sector, and again, that a lot of that is tied into the fact that we have so many at-place employees. And we also have in Arlington the highest percentage or ratio of multifamily households to single-family households in the entire D.C. metropolitan area. So we have 70,000 multifamily households in Arlington. So probably about 3/5 of our population actually lives in multifamily properties that we don't provide services to, that we regulate and rely on the regulatory programs to ensure that they are recycling and diverting. So that is a huge challenge for us, and our zero waste goal, which I'll talk about in a couple slides, that's just not going to be possible without targeting and getting more out of the commercial sector. So we've had ordinance on the books for more than 20 years requiring commercial recycling. It's been amended a number of times over the years, including by expanding materials and sort of addressing the functionality of the system. So we used to do paper copies of solid waste and recycling plans where businesses had to mail those to us every couple of years. We switched to retrack about a year and a half ago, and so everything is done, cloud-based now, which has been a huge relief. And in 2015, there was a significant code change that took effect that really increased the requirements substantially, and part of that was there was a co-location requirement that was part of that code change. And so prior to that, our inspections had focused on systems and buildings and ensuring that they had systems in place for their tenants to use. Now with the new code change, co-location, that co-location requirement means that we now have to inspect individual tenants in these commercial properties, and so that had the effect of increasing the number of regulated properties from about 1,400 to more than 4,000 in the past year. So part of what we did in 2016 was inspected all of those properties, and didn't just tell them if they were in compliance or not, but actually took a lot of observations and recorded a lot of data, and some of the key takeaways that we found is that not only about 40% of our businesses are in full compliance, although about 95% actually have some form of recycling or recycling system in place. And we found that the most common deficiencies were not having enough recycling bins and just struggling with the educational requirements. Our businesses are required to educate their employees every year. They have to have posters and labels on bins and things like that. There's a lot of struggle. A lot of businesses struggle with that. So one of the things that we do is we have a kit that that businesses can use and have downloadable labels and things like that. I think the other big challenge is that the county board adopted a fee in 2009. It's called the recycling system inspection fee, I believe, and it's built into code, and it's $66, which you would think is not a huge amount in a place like Arlington, but the way it's applied is that it's not assessed. It's something that we actually bill the businesses for. And the way the businesses are notified about that $66 annual fee is that our inspectors have to tell them that, which makes for some pretty tension-filled inspections. So that's something that we are going to be changing, and one of the challenges that we've had since we grew the number of businesses we regulate is that the remittance rate has been very low to the point where we have to actually turn a lot of properties over to our treasurer's office. I think the other big challenge is that there's just different interpretations of the code, and we have a lot of lawyers in Arlington, and so I think that there's a lot of interpretations of the code that my agency is not necessarily totally comfortable with. And so going back in, changing the code, making it crystal clear and more ironclad is something that we will be doing later this year. One of the things that we're proud of that is going to be continue to be a big part of our operations is we have a facility called the Earth Products Recycling Yard. And so we actually are able to receive and process aggregate materials, all kinds of inert materials and leaves and brush, and actually process them through our tub grinders and screeners and trommels and actually make usable material, and we close our own loop. So all the material that comes into this yard actually is utilized by other county agencies. So parks, the streets and or water, sewer, and streets will reuse the aggregate and things like that. This is something that we got an award for from SWANA, I think, in 2015. And it's about a 3-acre site. It's at the Public Works Trade Center where my offices are. So the fact that in a 26 square mile county we can have a facility like this, we're pretty fortunate. Oops. And so there's just a list of the materials that we actually that we accept and then what we turn them into. And again, we won a SWANA Excellence Award in 2015, and the compost that we generate actually meets the U.S. Composting Council seal of testing assurance. So we're pretty proud of that. It's good product. As Susan spoke about, we're pretty data-driven in Arlington. And so so it includes monthly performance measures where we have senior staff meetings where we focus on them and ask questions related to them. We have RFID tags on our residential carts. We now have a contractor that performs for our public schools and county agencies. We actually have onboard scale systems now. I mentioned that we use retract for our multifamily and commercial programs. And we're actually starting to give our operations crews actually tablets that they can use instead of the old paper work orders. So the data, again, just like for Seattle, for Arlington, we use all of our data to inform our stakeholders and help drive programs and policies. And one of the other things we do, I mentioned that at the top, is customer surveys. We survey our residents. Any kind of input or contact we get from our residents, we actually send them a survey form, and we get about 1,000 surveys returned to us per month. So we think it's real data that we're able to mine and make program adjustments as we need to. Excuse me. So some of the next steps for us in Arlington, we're going to be revising our solid waste code, as I mentioned, to, again, mostly focus on the multifamily and commercial challenges. One of the areas that I think that we need to do more of is ensure that the commercial hauler requirements are synced with the commercial business and commercial property requirements. So I think that, so we do have commercial hauler requirements now, but again, making sure they're more consistent and more synced up with the business requirements, I think, is important. So residential food waste, we actually had hoped to add food waste to our programs in fiscal 2018. And unfortunately, just the infrastructure just is not in place yet at scale to handle the amount of food waste that we think that we would be able to capture. And our plan at this point is to incorporate it in with our green carts with yard trimmings. And so there's a big yard waste processor in Northern Virginia that is trying to get permitted to take both materials. So that's something that we are looking forward to, and we think that will probably add about 10 points to our diversion rate if we can implement food waste recycling. And finally, a zero waste plan. Our county board adopted that in 2015. We adopted the Zero Waste International Alliance model, so the 90% diversion. And this is a planning process that's actually going to start this year, and it's going to take about 3.5 years. And so by FY21, we will have a plan completed. So there's a lot of challenges, though, on that road. And so one of the main ones, of course, is the high percentage of residents living in multifamily properties. No room for facilities. With 26 square miles, we're wholly dependent on out-of-county facilities to process our materials. We have our waste-to-energy plant is operated by Covanta, and the county negotiated a contract extension with them a few years ago, which guarantees us a $0 tipping fee in 2024. Now that's great. I mean, it's going to save the county money, but that will put pressure from some groups will put pressure on the county to further justify why we're delivering recycling programs that cost more than $0 a ton. Our tipping fee right now is $43.16 per ton. Our programs can't compete with that. At zero, things change. Political realities in Virginia. We're a Dillon's Rule state. So local jurisdictions in Virginia, counties and independent cities, they need authorization from the state to enact certain local laws and ordinances. So Virginia, the Dillon Rule basically asserts that counties and locals get basically they get the okay to do things through the state legislature. So that means doing things like bag fees or bans or materials bans. If it's not authorized by the General Assembly, it's going to be difficult for us to do. And the Virginia General Assembly is not a type of body that is really interested in those types of things right now. And I think one of the other things that we will be addressing or that will be difficult for us to deal with is because of the Dillon's Rule issues, we probably will not be able to implement commercial franchising. And then finally, the evolving waste stream. Just like everybody else, we've seen drastic changes in the makeup of our waste stream over the last number of years, and that's going to continue to create challenges, especially as it gets lighter and as sort of that diversion rate metric that so many of us have relied on for so long, that becomes less and less relevant because of the changing of the waste stream. So we will be going a lot to per capita measurement and things like that. So that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Jim? Now for a few words about our friends to the north.
Thank you, Bill. First of all, thank you to WasteExpo for hosting this great event. Do I just advance this? No? Okay. There we go. Thank you for all of you of coming, and thank you to the Convention Center for cranking the air conditioning in here to the point that even a Canadian feels at home. I'm going to walk you through just a few things, give you a little bit of context. I'll talk about our long-term waste management strategy, some of our challenges and opportunities, and then some of the things that we're looking at in the future. I think one thing that you'll find as I go through this is we've got three fundamentally different sized municipalities represented up here, and a lot of the challenges that we're facing, a lot of the opportunities that we're pursuing are all very, very similar. So first of all, some background and context. And I always include a slide like this when I give a presentation, especially a Canadian, whenever I present in another country, because I know how much I hate it when somebody says, oh, well, Europe's doing it, why don't you do what's in Europe? Well, it's a fundamentally different context in some cases as to how they operate their systems. Canada, and especially in Ontario and BC, is in a similar boat. We have different circumstances that actually change what we can do in terms of our programs. So a quick infographic to give you a little bit of background on Toronto. We're roughly around 3 million people right now. That's split about half and half, multifamily and single family. We, for the most part, only manage the residential portion of the materials coming through the waste stream. Commercial and industrial is managed through the private sector. So you can see we've got a garbage program. We're a rate-based program similar to Seattle. We certainly don't get your fees. I'd love to know how you can charge that on a monthly basis. A full green bin curbside program to both single-family and multifamily customers. Our blue bin program, and then a yard waste program. And then as well, we have waste electronics, household hazardous waste. We are one of the few communities that I'm aware of in North America where we actually collect household hazardous waste and waste electronics curbside through a separate program. As you can see, our diversion rate overall is pretty good at 52%, 65% in the single-family homes, and that is flatlined over the last couple of years, 27% in multifamily homes, which is also flatlined. We, like Seattle and some of the others, are looking at changing how we measure diversion. And ideally next year, I'm going to be putting forward a proposal that we won't measure diversion by weight in Toronto anymore. It's actually ugly numbers year over year. It's the same or it's actually going down when we know we're actually handling much more material year over year. And it's largely due to packaging, lightweighting, changes in volumes. So we're looking at a different set of metrics and stop using these types of metrics. We also do all the street and litter bins. Garbage from the recycling bins in the parks. Roughly on the street right now, so it's a 3-cart program, roughly 1.6 million carts out there for single family. And then our assets, so we've got 7 transfer stations, most of which have a drop-off depot co-located, something that we're looking at changing. As we get more and more dense in the downtown, people are starting to move away from a car-based system. Our drop-off depots don't make a whole lot of sense anymore in certain areas of the city because nobody has a car to actually put their material in and take it, and nobody's going to take a subway to get rid of their garbage. We've got one operating landfill, which is our primary disposal facility. It costs us more to run that ourselves right now than the private sector tipping fee and other private sector landfills. So we're actually paying to ship material away from our landfill site right now. It's a long-term investment, so the less we actually put in our landfill site, the better we will be over the long term. We have 160 closed landfills that we're responsible for inside the city. Some of these landfills are the size of this room, and landfill is a very generous term for those sites. Some of them are much larger. So a huge ongoing monitoring responsibility. We spend anywhere from just regular ongoing maintenance and monitoring anywhere from $10 to $12 million a year just to maintain those sites. The services in the program, so we've got our blue bin recycling, which is printed paper and packaging, which is the extended producer responsibility term for what we manage. That is probably one of the fundamental differences between what we have and what most of you have south of the border, is we have extended producer responsibility where the manufacturers and the distributors of the product are actually responsible for a portion of the cost to manage that product. So we get 50% of our net blue bin recycling costs reimbursed to us by the Unilevers and Procter & Gamble's and Coca-Cola's of the world. They help actually offset the cost of our programs. That actually allows us to do much more on the recycling side because we've got an influx of a revenue stream. Green bin organics, and so recycling is collected biweekly. We've got our curbside green bin program, which has been running for a little over 10 years now. That runs weekly, and our garbage collection is biweekly. So we're one of the communities now that has switched to a biweekly garbage collection. We have a more advanced list of organics that we collect, so things like diapers, sanitary, pet waste, are all included in our organics program because of our 2 anaerobic digestion facilities that we have. We can accept an expanded list of organic material. That has allowed us to move to a biweekly garbage collection process as well. One of the things that we found in some of our neighboring communities when you switch to biweekly, it's just that much more incentive to divert more material. Our yard waste collection program, oversized metals and appliances, household program, hazardous waste program, electronics program, and then we also do community environment days. These are essentially environment fairs that we set up in each of the local ward each of the councillors has their local ward. We set those up, and it's basically a fun day for parents and kids to come out, but they can also drop off materials, and we have reuse stations set up there now as well where they can exchange materials. I'm not going to go into detail on the provincial policy context other than to say that it's all changing in Ontario right now. And the one thing that I will flag that is going to be the biggest change for all of us that we are trying to figure out how we're going to actually incorporate this happened in British Columbia, if you've seen what's happened up there, is as we transition through extended producer responsibility, right now the producers, which is what we call them, or the stewards, pay 50% of the cost. Over the next several years, that will transition to 100% of the cost. They've agreed to do that under the condition that they then take control of the recycling system. So in the next few years, municipalities won't actually have control over their recycling system in Ontario. That will be run by an organization that is funded by the Procter & Gamble's and the Coca-Colas of the world. We will still have a role. We understand. We may still collect material. We'll jointly do promotion and education, jointly do enforcement. But we are essentially, rather than working and our taxpayers or our ratepayers paying the bill, it will be the big industry producers and stewards that are paying the bill. So as you can imagine, this has got all of us kind of thinking right now, how do you take a fully integrated waste management system and extract a fundamental piece of that and pull it out of the system? Everybody kind of agrees that it's a good idea to do that. It's the logistics of how you might actually go about that that could be a real challenge. We have our long-term waste management strategy, similar sort of concepts as what you heard from Arlington and Seattle. An aspirational goal of zero waste. I will not commit to a full quantitative target of zero waste, but we have an aspirational goal of zero waste. And a circular economy. So we're trying to shift away from the concept of using the term zero waste, because everybody thinks that's actually going to produce no waste, and move more towards a circular economy concept. Which is becoming pretty important. The things that I want to kind of highlight about our long-term strategy, moving to mobile depots for recycling. So rather than the traditional drop-off depot where you have to drive to the depot, we're looking at mobile depots where we can actually take the services of a drop-off depot to a high-rise complex for a day or two or a week, and essentially bring the services to our customers. We're looking at partnerships and collaboration. So recognizing the fact that as much as we like to think that we're the best at everything, there are certain services that could be provided by others that might be better. We already have a significant portion of our system that's contracted out. But in terms of other services like textiles, so that's one of the next targets on our list. Once you get all the recycling out and the organics out, textiles is one of those next big quantities that's left in the garbage. We're looking at systems where maybe it's not the municipal role to actually go out and collect that material. We've got not-for-profit agencies right now who are actually coming to people's doorstep collecting that material. So rather than take on another program or a service and a financial burden that potentially goes along with it, work with community partners, and so we essentially become an enabler rather than a service provider in some of these areas. Still focusing on recycling, reduce, reuse, recycle in our apartments and condos, doing swaps and exchanges. So working with, the local mom-to-mom sale, trying to find a way to, sort of enhance the ability of those types of more community-grown environments and events. Food waste reduction, which I'm sure all of you have heard a lot about over the last couple of years about the importance of food waste reduction. So we're working with various homeless shelters, food recovery agencies, trying to understand what the municipal solid waste role is in a food waste reduction strategy overall. Recovery of resources, which I'll talk about in a future slide, and then enforcement and measurement of its success. So as I mentioned, moving away from the traditional diversion metric and moving more into things like per capita waste generation, greenhouse gas reduction, other, I believe, more relevant measures of a waste management system performance. And then down at the bottom, we like to get a little bit creative with some of our messaging as well. So you'll see the ladies in the wonderful clothing out there about reduce, reuse, and really about donate it, reuse it, rock it. The little dinosaur in the middle was part of our Bad Things Contamination campaign, where we actually did a bunch of videos, short clips that were run as commercials on television before the movie started, in movie theaters, subway stations, all over the place. You can search them on YouTube. They're actually pretty funny. I thought I was going to get in trouble for it, but I didn't, which is good. They're a little bit on the edgy side in some cases. Cigarette butts is a bit of a problem that we're having right now in terms of litter. I think that cigarette looks like it's giving everyone the finger, but I didn't get in trouble for that either. And then we've moved over to, you see it now, don't you, after I pointed it out. And then we've moved over to a fully automated collection system as well. Now that we're a full cart-based system, we can go fully automated collections. We've got our new green bins, which RERIG has supplied us with the gravity lock system on it now. We had a real problem with raccoons getting into our smaller bins. They could get into those smaller bins. It's incredible how quickly they could get into a small bin. We've got around 300,000 of those bins out on the street yet, and we haven't had a raccoon incident, which is great. So the residents, although they're a little bit bigger than what they're used to, the residents absolutely love them. Some of the challenges and opportunities. So one of the challenges is just internal and external pressures. So you see the sort of circular diagram there. These are all the services that we provide, right up from at the point of generation, through collections and drop-off, through the transfer stations, recycling and processing, what we do on recovery, our residual. There's enforcement, there's system financing, where do we get the money to do all this sort of stuff. So some of the internal system pressures that we're facing, City of Toronto policy, even though we're a rate-based program, we continually get pressures for 0% increases year over year, even though we're heavily contracted out with CPI included in all those contracts. So it's a really hard opportunity to kind of balance that. We have an extremely fast-growing population right now, and property values, if you haven't heard, are going through the roof in Toronto at the moment. There are double-digit percentage increases on property values year over year right now. Changing demographics. We have a very large immigrant population and growing every day. So we are translating materials into 20 or 30 different languages in some cases. We're translating, we're not transcreating, which I think is a fantastic idea. Changing urban form and density, which is becoming a bit of a challenge, and then just enforcement. On the external side, as I mentioned, there's legislation coming that's changing. There's the concept of extended producer responsibility, mostly for the blue bin material, but there is now discussion from the province about organics, potentially a ban on organics province-wide, but also on what they call branded organics. So what we're starting to see is a move to biodegradable plastic, packaging, biodegradable plastics for packaging. In Ontario, if you're a cynic, that could be an argument to say, well, if I make that plastic out of PET, then I got to pay for 50% of the cost to manage it as PET. If I can create the same packaging out of a biodegradable material, the municipality has to take it through their organics program, and I have to pay nothing. So we're actually looking at branded organics. So the little compostable coffee pods that they're marketing now, they would also have to pay for the management of that, but through the green bin program, which will hopefully offset some costs. We face the same sort of issues that all you do on markets and access to markets, because the reality is most of what we market comes down into the States anyways, or overseas. Programs and infrastructure funding, climate change. So we have cap and trade now in Ontario, which is actually, we're one of the few municipal divisions that will actually benefit from cap and trade because we've moved to CNG vehicles and because of our anaerobic digestion facilities. We'll actually be able to take advantage of cap and trade as a revenue stream to offset some of our other costs. Changing waste composition, again, just as big an issue for us, and then just general economic conditions. Contamination, that is probably the bane of our existence right now, is our contamination rate in our single stream material. Lots of pictures up there. Yes, that is a boa constrictor in the top right. I don't know who thought that a boa constrictor was recyclable. We don't know when it died, but it was found on the line at the recycling facility going across a conveyor. So whether it was alive at that point or not, the screams were just as loud when it went by. But you can see this is what our recycling looks like, 26% contamination in recycling. And as much as we like to blame the multi-residential buildings for this, single family are not much better. We're having huge challenges. We do a lot on the promotion and education side. So we spend, we manage roughly 1 million tons through the system. We spend $4 to $5 million a year on promotion and education. So that's actually a pretty significant amount on promotion and education. I feel every time I say this like I'm completely losing my faith in humanity, but promotion and education is only doing so much, and it's not doing the job at the moment. So we are moving forward with a much more aggressive enforcement tactics. Not necessarily enforcement in the traditional sense where you go out and inspect and fine somebody for doing the wrong thing. We're doing more bin rejections right now. And the way our system is set up, if you go into a multi-residential building and that blue dumpster is full of garbage, we'll wave off the recycling truck, send in the garbage truck, and then we will bill them for the garbage lift that's associated with that garbage. So we're actually in essence, fining them, but we're actually managing it as a garbage stream. And then obviously we offer to go out and work with these buildings, give them the tools that they need to be successful. When we make the phone call to let them know that we just collected their recycling as garbage, because everybody seems to have a cell phone out there right now taping our guys with a garbage truck emptying in a blue bin. About half of them have a response back that says, honestly, I don't really care as long as my bin is empty. And that's the type of behavior that we're dealing with right now. So that's why it sounds a little like I have lost my faith in humanity is when you hear comments like that. That is actually driving us to reconsider our system overall. So we've had this type of recycling system in multi-res for, 20 years now. On the green bin side, our green bins in most of these buildings have been rolled out for the last 8 years or so, almost 10 years in some cases. So these are mature programs. These aren't new programs. So we're starting to take a step back, and we're going to be doing some work this year and into next year to almost do a bit of a reflection back on, 10 years later after these programs have rolled out, did they really work the way we thought they were, and is there other ways to do it? So in parallel to that, we're looking at things like mixed waste processing, maybe moving to more of a wet-dry type system as a pilot to see, if you can pull the organics out and then use technology to separate the recycling from a dry garbage. Maybe that's a way to do this. In some of our lower income subsidized social housing areas, we're up over 50% contamination in recycling, and once you pass 50%, it's garbage now, and actually once you pass probably about 30% or 26%, it's pretty much garbage. So looking at, is there a technology, basically saying uncle, recognizing that this is not working in some areas, and in some of these areas, getting food on the table is their number one priority, not necessarily which bin does this go in. So looking at a technology solution, and then because we're a rate-based program, is there a way that we can actually just add a premium charge for an additional processing fee and offer it as a service? Other challenges that we're facing, like I said, we're growing really fast, like Seattle, really, really fast. Some pictures on the right here of what Toronto looks like now. We have building design and access requirements built into all new and renovation requirements in the city. To be on our system, it's a mandatory 3-stream system in order to be in the system. But some of the other challenges with density that we're dealing with now, more and more bicycle lanes being put on all the roadways. So that actually presents a bit of a problem for us because that's an actual physical barrier in some cases between the street that we collect from and the curb where those bins are sitting. So that's leading to more and more problems. It's forcing more and more night collections that we're starting to do now in those types of areas. It's certainly not safe with an automated side loader to go collect those with a bicycle lane in the middle. You can just imagine a big steel arm going across that bicycle lane and what would happen. Traffic congestion. So like I said, we're doing more nighttime collection now, especially in the downtown area because there's so much congestion. Car-free designs, like I said, with our drop-off depots. A lot of people don't have a car anymore, or they use a car share type program. The little smart cars running around. There's no room to put garbage or a sofa or that sort of thing into those vehicles anymore. So ways of trying to alter the services that we provide and bring those services to the customers who still need that service. Increasing densities and narrowing roadways. More and more laneways, more and more requests for laneway servicing. We try to avoid that as much as possible. For the most part, they create a safety issue with our trucks. They're a health and safety issue. Homelessness is not bad in Toronto, but that's where a lot of the homeless will hang out, is in those laneways. So we have had incidents where we go down laneways and hit someone that's hard to see. Source separation, program space requirements. So on the curbside, with our automated systems now, by the time you get 3 large carts out side by side with sufficient space to get the claw around each one, that pretty much takes up the entire front of a person's house when it's collection day. But I think more importantly, in the high density areas where we got these high-rise condo units, we're getting a lot of pushback from developers that they don't want to put that much space, allocate that much space of a development into all these different recycling bins. They want a more condensed solution. Basically, it's half a condo unit, or it's a couple of parking spaces that they lose that are extremely valuable downtown. And then just ultimately health and safety. With that many people moving around, how can you bring large garbage trucks into such a downtown environment like this and do it in a safe way? So it doesn't sound like I'm all doom and gloom. I figured I'd throw up an opportunity as well. We, a number of years ago, invested in anaerobic digestion technology for our green bin material. We are now in the process of hopefully reaping a benefit from that. Unfortunately, so we've got 2 anaerobic digestion facilities with a combined capacity of around 140,000 tons. That's metric tons. Sorry, this is all metric for you. You'll have to do the conversion. They are all being flared. The biogas is being flared right now, which is just an unbelievable waste of a resource. So we are in the process of now moving through to actually capture that, clean it, and then inject it back into the pipeline. We have, through renewable natural gas opportunities, also through cap and trade, because we'll get credit through our cap and trade program to do this. The business case is much better now to be able to promote this. And since our entire fleet is now, or will be in the next couple of years, CNG trucks, we can actually do a complete closed loop. So we collect the organics out on the street, take it to the organic with a CNG powered vehicle, take it to an AD plant, harness the biogas, clean it up, inject it back into the pipeline to fuel that truck to go back out and collect more green bin organics. So I like to show that diagram. Everybody talks about the circular economy and how you close the loop. I think that's the perfect example of how you can potentially do that. Looking to the future, just one slide. As I said, we're starting to examine alternatives to source separation, especially in our high density areas. It's not necessarily working the way I think anybody thought it would. And I know there's experience in Europe now where they're starting to look at this as well. Citywide legislation to require waste diversion. So the actual ordinances only apply to the customers that we service, and we don't service all the customers. So we're trying to level the playing field by saying, regardless of whether you're a residence, you're a commercial, you're an industrial property, you should be required to at least provide waste diversion services to your customers. A provincial ban on organics to disposal is in the works right now. It'll be interesting to see how that rolls out, and it may actually be a market opportunity for us. We know at some point within the next 10 years we're going to have to start construction of a 3rd anaerobic digestion facility. What we're doing right now is running a business case. Do we build that early, recognizing a ban coming in place, and we can just fill it with merchant capacity facility as a merchant capacity facility until we need the capacity ourselves? And it's another revenue stream for what we're trying to do. Alternative sources of revenue, different ways of basically finding money. If we're held to a rate increase of a certain amount, then we've got to find other ways to actually finance the system. As I mentioned, climate change impacts and cap and trade. One of the things that we're working on is really what's the role of a municipality in the sharing economy. You see it with bicycles now, bike share, you see it with cars, tool share. We're actually working with some of the tool share organizations right now as solid waste to understand how we can promote those. If people are buying less tools because they're able to share them, that just means in a number of years that's less tool waste going into the garbage bin. Database decision making and frameworks, similar to what Susan was saying about Seattle, is really trying to harness the power of data so that when we start making these decisions, we fully understand the impacts and have a good set of metrics to do that. Modifying how we measure waste system performance, moving away from the traditional waste diversion or tons disposed into more things like greenhouse gas reduction, per capita waste generation, the typical health and safety type metrics. But we're actually in the process of developing what I call the balanced scorecard, which will be about 10 or 12 sort of KPIs on waste system performance, and then use that to track performance overall. And then going beyond our core business, we're, on that list there, some of that is related to waste, but a lot of it is related to markets, commodities. We're getting into the energy business. We're getting into the gas business. We're getting into the pipeline business now. Some of those businesses we don't actually want to be in. So how do we engage with those businesses who are experts in those as a municipality and as a quasi-utility to be able to do this? But I think my point is that when we start to go out and hire individuals, we're looking for a much broader skill set now and range of skills than what a traditional system would probably look for, and having a very hard time finding some of those individuals. So with that, thank you very much.
All right, we have time for a couple questions. I know we're running a little late, but if anyone does have a question, we've got 2 microphones in the walkways. Please use those.
This is Brenda, Keep America Beautiful. Lots of information, you guys. But a quick question, Jim, for you. Point of clarification. The contamination rate, 26% plus, that you talked about, just in multifamily? Just, I say, sorry, but...
Yeah, just. That's a combined rate. So we go out and do audits right across the city, and we've got some single-family routes that are as low as 2 or 3%. And we've got some areas that are up, like I said, 50 to 60% in multifamily. And, so we've got some single-family routes as well that are, well over that 26%. So what we're actually doing is going route by route right now to identify which are the badder, if that's a word, routes. And then we can do targeted engagement, targeted enforcement to really, we don't have enough people to go everywhere across the entire city. It's a big city. But to really kind of focus our efforts, and again, using that sort of data that we can collect to understand where we can get the most bang for our buck.
My name is Martin van Nieuwenhof from the Dutch Environmental Department. In Europe, we're trying to implement circular economy as well, and we're using actually a lot more, what I didn't hear today, the instrument of public procurement to incorporate circular criteria in our buying products and services. Even if it's not in a contract, or even if it's in a contracted way, we can put that into place. I wonder if Toronto or the 2 other cities in the US are using this kind of instrument as well to incorporate more the circular concept in procurement.
In Arlington, we have a buy recycled policy that's been on the books for a long time. There's been some effort to implement a environmentally preferable purchasing policy, but that has not gotten the traction that it needs. And so I would say that's one of the key things that we need to bake into our zero waste planning process. I think one other thing I'd say is that I think it goes beyond just the products. I think that there's certain zero waste principles that need to be incorporated into business operations throughout an entire jurisdiction. So I'll give a shout to Austin, Texas. I think that pretty much I believe all of their departments, when they go out for a procurement or something like that, they have to sort of meet certain requirements as part of just their daily operations and put those requirements on vendors and things like that.
We also in Seattle have a green purchasing requirements, and we also encourage through our procurement processes certain environmental goals. We also have race and social equity goals, so we have environmental, race, social, and equity, and sustainability goals that are all incorporated. But at the same time, those can be re-looked at and should be updated on a regular basis. And I believe that we're just beginning the process to re-look at our procurement green purchasing guide for the city and update that. So.
We do as well a green purchasing program at Toronto as well. Could it be better? Absolutely. It's not a mandatory, which is what I would like to see. It's suggested, it's favorable, it's ranked with a very minimal point score that's attached to it, and typically cost wins the day, unfortunately. So we've got to change that whole mindset with our purchasing.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Ashley from Salt Lake County. We operate a municipal landfill with a composting operation. So my question is, if you are collecting green waste curbside, both food and yard waste, but it's mandatory or universal, how do you deal with contamination, and where's that responsibility if you do it through a third party, if your composting operation is a third party?
So we do have a third-party collection, and then we have a third-party processor in Seattle. Contamination, so the actual driver will look, and if it, from just looking at it, is heavily contaminated, they won't pick it up. They'll leave it and they'll oops tag it. But our processors also have screening processes that they screen, they double screen, they screen in the front end, they screen in the back end to try to get the plastics out. The plastics is where the big issue is. And then we educate and educate and educate, and I can't emphasize that. It's not the silver bullet, but it makes a huge difference. But the actual responsibility, though, it kind of flows through the process. So the collection, there's some responsibility there to visually look, and then there's the responsibility to screen it out, and we pay for that through our contracting process.
So we do a lot of the same things. So, for example, if residents put organic material out in plastic bags, they're left behind at the curb with the oops tag. We 6 months of the year, we send our yard trimmings to a organics processor in Loudoun County, which is in Northern Virginia. And the other 6 months of the year, during leaf season, we actually process that material at the yard, Earth Products yard that I showed pictures of. So both systems are set up to screen out contamination, but definitely when it comes into our yard, we have a lot more control over that too.
Control how? You're saying in your yard you have more control over the material. So your process, you mean, to screen it out?
Yes. Okay. We're lucky it's not really there either. We're pretty fortunate that the materials are 99% of the time prepared correctly. So.
Okay. So do your fees, Susan, you talked about fees that you charge, like a pay-as-you-throw system. Mm-hmm. So are your expenses covered by that larger garbage fee? Because from what I understand, those fees wouldn't cover the cost of recycling totally. Right?
So we have an agreement with our recycling processor where we share with respect to the market value of the materials that they process. So there's some sharing that we get income from that. Our fees cover a significant portion, and then there is a fee on the organics that covers the cost of the organics. So there's a combination of ways that we bring money in, and then we turn around and pay it out. And we do long-range planning to basically look at what the rate needs to be in order to cover our anticipated costs. And we have long-term contracts with our contractors, so we can look we can look out pretty far and say, okay, here's what our costs are going to be based on whatever the cost of living increase or other kinds of increase on the various contracts we have. And then we can look at, well, what kind of rate do we need to have in order to cover those costs?
If I can, to add to that, we've got a similar type of rate program by container type that Seattle has. So we've got, the difference is we only charge for garbage, and the cost of the system is loaded onto the garbage rate. So we have 4 different sizes of garbage containers, and you pay based on the size of your garbage. And then in the resident's eyes, you get recycling and organics for free. That's not actually true, but that's how they see it. One of the things that I think is important for all of you who are even considering something like this is what we're finding is the intent behind that was it would be a financial incentive to encourage diversion and put more material into the recycling and organics. There is, what we're finding though, a bit of a perverse incentive where people are trying to save money. So they are downsizing the size of their garbage bin so they pay less overall, and when that garbage bin gets full, it's going into the recycling cart or into the green cart. So our contamination rates are starting to escalate. And we're actually now doing audits by garbage bin type to see if there are differences in contamination rates over time for customers who are downsizing their bins.
Thank you.
We haven't run into quite that issue, but I love the idea of doing the audit because, again, I'm a believer in data driving. And so we have the bulk of our customers have smaller bins, the mini can or the micro can, but at the same time, the more information you have, the better decisions you can make. So
I'm going to use the moderator's platform here to ask you guys my own question. Seattle is, I would say, if I'm ranking cities by their engagement and their success at diversion, it'd go Seattle, Arlington, Toronto. I'm also going to guess, based on what I heard today, that the alternative to diversion, landfill, on a cost basis, would also go Seattle, Arlington, Toronto. And so my question is, in an environment where the alternative is relatively inexpensive, can you aspire to something of significant levels of diversion when the underlying economics aren't there? And I know that's a tough question, but and it's more for Jim because you have this high cost in Seattle. You have this high, and that allows you to do so many things that others can't do. But in a place where you don't have that high cost, when a lot of your trash makes its way down to Michigan, relatively inexpensively, and then you're trying to do. How do you think about that?
So you're absolutely right. Municipal waste is not allowed to flow outside into Michigan anymore. Some of it is flowing into New York State, which is actually closer for Toronto. We have our own landfill site, so we're running around a $90 per ton tip rate, and then maybe another $30 on top of that for haulage to get it to the site. Michigan, so we don't necessarily have that. That is still cheaper though than our organics program, which is a fundamental problem every time we try to do something on the organic side. Because our anaerobic digestion technology, it is a much more expensive technology. On the industrial and commercial side of things, a large portion of that material is going into the U.S. somewhere right now. You know, Michigan is running, I think last I heard, around $15 a ton tip rate, and from Ontario, you pay $40 to get it there. That's really cheap compared to just about any other diversion opportunity that you've got. So it really isn't driving the behavior. You know, when I started and I said, context, we're not Europe. I'd love to see what Europe has, where there's some sort of levy on disposal, which will then drive the behavior.
At a very high level.
Yeah.
Which creates the
economics
conditions that allow you to do other things.
Yeah. And if we didn't have the revenue coming from the producers on the recycling side, we would be even more trouble right now.
If there aren't any other questions, then I will close the session then. Thank you to our speakers.
Thank you.
I'm going to leave a bunch of materials up here if you want to take some, feel free. Thanks.